Yesterday's report is a breath of fresh air, but in some sense there wasn't much that's new in there, just a lot more detail about what's been known for a long time. I will only focus on a few key things, but let me start by reading a very important part of the report that might have been missed. Economic impacts of climate change, including the impacts on households and the cost of living. The emerging academic view is that the current modelling methodologies are likely to significantly underestimate the economic impacts and do not take into account the potential cascading impacts from the physical damage from climate change to our economy. Transmission of financial risk internationally could also significantly increase the economic impact. So what you see in that report is the best case scenario. My PhD is in macroeconomic modelling. I know as well as anyone the limitations of economic modelling. I assure you that the economic models we use, that Treasury use, that the Reserve Bank use, were not built with this in mind. And I can't stress enough the number of variables that are simply just not included in this model because these models weren't built to do this. So this is a minimum cost. This is a minimum cost. Let me give you an example of how much worse things are than you might likely expect. A lot of people talk about insurance becoming unaffordable. Just to be crystal clear, every mortgage contract in Australia obliges the holder of the mortgage to have insurance. Every mortgage contract. The reason we think bank lending is safe is that not only lending against real estate, they're lending against insured real estate. So the entire risk profile of the entire financial system is based on the idea that house prices don't go down. And even if houses burst into flames, it's actually the insurance company's risk, not the bank's risk. So to be crystal clear, if a house is uninsurable, it is unmortgageable. If a house is uninsurable, it is unmortgageable. The potential catastrophic impacts of whole suburbs and regions not being able to insure their houses is not included in this report, rightly, because the tools for doing so don't exist. But again, to be crystal clear, the bank expects that if you've got a mortgage, your house is fully insured. If your house is not fully insured, you are in breach of your mortgage contract. Right now in Australia today, we know there are people who are uninsured. Right now in Australia today, we know there are people who are underinsured. The RBA isn't looking, APRA isn't looking, ASIC aren't looking. Everybody knows that not only is there uninsurance and underinsurance today, what this has just told us is that in the coming decades there will be far more of this. This is a crucial part of the problem that our regulators are ignoring and that this report can't have provided the answers to. Just quickly, when this damage comes, someone will have to pay. You can only insure against unlikely events. Insurance companies do not insure against likely events. No 20-year-old in Australia can rent a Ferrari and insure it. Okay? No, you can't insure against that risk. What this report says is that flooding will be so common in large parts of Australia, you will not be able to insure. So, just to be clear, individuals will not insure their way out of this crisis. You cannot insure against likely events. So what is going to happen is we are either going to tell people you are on your own, you are stranded, your house is worthless, we're sad for you, or we are going to say, oh, I'm so sad that we actually want to give you large amounts of public money. But to do what? To rebuild in the place that keeps flooding? To move? To where? These are not hypothetical. And to give everyone a sense of timing, we're telling 20-year-olds today to worry about a mortgage that they won't pay off before 2050. We're telling 20-year-olds to worry about superannuation that they won't get their hands on until 2065. And this report is saying there are catastrophic risks coming right now, way before you need your super, way before you'll pay off a 25 or 30-year loan. So the fossil fuel industry seems to me to be the obvious person to pay for this, because in Australia today we're giving half of our gas away for free. The ACTU says that if we taxed it at 25%, we could have $12 billion a year. We're giving more than $10 billion a year in Commonwealth subsidies for fossil fuels. That's $25 billion a year, that we could actually stop encouraging climate change with and start diverting. But to be clear, the insurance industry will not help people in 20 years' time with their flooded houses. They can't. That's not insurance. And just finally, we've done a lot of work at the Australian Institute on climate risk. Less than 40% of Australians even know what it is, what the term means. We are bombarded with information about superannuation risk. We are bombarded with information about what suburb to buy a house in to maximise capital gain. Most Australians aren't even in this conversation yet. Yet here we are, literally approving new gas and coal projects in the week leading up to this risk assessment coming out. No wonder the public aren't in uproar. Hopefully they'll read this report, but I can see why the report wasn't released before that most recent fossil fuel project was approved. But Australians need to engage with climate risk as much, if not more, than they do about superannuation risk or the risk of missing out on a cheap house. Thank you.
I'm going to go to Senator Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Admiral, and also Dr Dennis. Very moving testimony, and in particular credit to your submission, which I read in full the other night. And it's you're right that it's a shocking climate risk report that we've just seen. To avoid the impacts outlined in the report, how quickly do each of you think we need to get off fossil fuels, including ending fossil fuel exports?
Sorry, can I have that again? I'm a bit hard of hearing.
Sorry, I'll speak up. To avoid the impacts outlined in the climate risk report, How soon do you each think we need to get off fossil fuels, including exporting fossil fuels?
I'll try to answer your question, but I have to reject the premise of it first. We're not trying to get off fossil fuels. We're still getting into them. All this talk of transition is fraud. We are still opening new coal projects. We are still opening new gas projects while talking about decarbonising. So it's kind of hypothetical to talk about how soon we should get off fossil fuels, because we're still getting into fossil fuels. And indeed, both the previous government and the current government are proud of this. That's why we're still opening new ones. So, of course, we should get off them as soon as we can. But let's be honest with each other, we're still getting into them. We're still opening parts of Australia that have never extracted gas or have never extracted coal to that activity, while saying how are we going to help workers transition away from that activity. We're still building greenfield sites in parts of Australia that have never been in fossil fuel production. So, of course, we should get off them as quick as we can, but let's own the reality. There is no transition away from fossil fuels occurring in Australia. There is a transition towards them. And it is a subsidised transition. It costs $1.5 billion of taxpayers' money to support the Middle Arm gas project so that we can refine more gas up there. It takes government policy to keep getting us into more fossil fuels while scientists say we should be getting out of them. So to say to the scientists, how quickly should we get out when we're still getting in, you know, it's like if someone's had their second heart attack and we're buying them extra cigarettes. But, oh, it's all right, they're walking more than they used to. So let's be clear, we need to get off them as quick as we can, but we're ignoring that advice. We're getting into them further and further every time we open a new gas project. And then, of course, again, choosing my words carefully, Australia gives away more than half the gas it exports for free. So if apparently our economy depends on it, which I don't accept, but if it did, surely everyone here should agree we could at least tax it. And by the way, that's Treasury that says the PRRT isn't collecting any tax. The PRRT isn't collecting any tax from our new offshore gas projects, according to Treasury. So, yeah, we should get off it as quick as we can, but you can't get off it when you're still on a bender.
Dr Dennis, you've done a lot of work with the Australia Institute on the fossil fuel companies and the freebies that they get constantly from all levels of government, and the fact that they avoid tax and then they get exemptions from the PRRT for export. Can you talk to me a bit about the costs of clean-up after natural disasters, which of course are turbocharged by coal and gas companies making their own private profits whilst everybody else suffers? We're told that the cost to clean up will be $40 billion a year, even if we stick to 1.5 degrees. Who should be paying for that?
Yeah, good question. Anyone worried about the cost of the NDIS rising should be a lot more worried about what's in this climate risk assessment. And again, as I read out before, according to the authors, these are underestimates. So all of these numbers are underestimates. Look, someone's going to pay. Someone's going to pay for the houses that get destroyed. Someone's going to pay for the roads that get destroyed. Someone's going to pay for the bridges and the libraries that get destroyed. Someone's going to pay. That's all economics can help people with, is what do you think it's going to cost and how are we going to divvy that up? So let's go with the $40 billion number, not far off what we currently spend on the age pension at the moment. Right? These are not small numbers. By the way, far more than we spend on unemployment benefits. So anyone that's worried about the cost to the budget should be far more worried about this. Who's going to pay? Well, luckily we still live in a democracy, and you and and the people who come after you are going to decide that. But the decisions are going to be very, very hard. We, as one of the wealthiest countries in the world, a country that's so rich and generous that we give half of our gas away for free, have not found it in ourselves to help the victims of the bushfires. There are still people living with temporary housing solutions from bushfires 5 years ago.
Because they weren't insured.
That's right. So we today can't afford, and when I say can't afford, I mean choose to spend money on something else. We say we can't afford to help those bushfire victims. We can't afford, i.e. choose not to, help the people that have been affected by repeated flooding in Lismore. Today, we're saying we can't afford to fix it today. We can afford the submarines, we can afford to give the gas away for free, we can afford the subsidies for fossil fuels. As a democracy, how are we going to speak to whole communities? It's not just people from Bangladesh moving to Australia. People from Australia are going to have to move. And it is entirely up to this parliament whether we say, well, you chose to live in a low-lying area, you should have listened to that climate risk assessment back in 2025. Go you. That's one option. Another option is we go, oh, hang on, we're going to have to bandy together to help because I don't want to do that. But think about the political tension that's going to come. The political tension that the people who come after you are going to have to deal with when the people in the non-flood affected areas are being asked to pay a lot more tax to help the people in the flood affected areas or the fire affected areas. And imagine how much fun we'll all have looking back saying, if only we hadn't given all that gas away for free. If only we hadn't subsidised all the cause of this. Imagine how much money we would have had to deal with this crisis today if this current parliament wasn't still being so generous to the fossil fuel industry. So someone will pay, whether it's the individual through losing everything, whether it's the local government, whether it's the state government or whether it's the federal government, someone will pay. But unless we start taxing the fossil fuel industry today, it won't be them. Because just like the insurance companies aren't going to be there to insure your house in a flood-affected area, I promise you the fossil fuel industry will have walked away from the scene of the crime saying, I'm not even there anymore, so how can I pay any tax? Sorry, just one last quick point. If you pick up a newspaper in Australia today, you'll read about how we need to open up new areas for housing, we need more land for housing. Big article in the Sydney Morning Herald, 8,000 new dwellings along Parramatta Road. 8,000. You've just got a report that says 1.5 million. 1.5 million houses might be uninsurable. So if this parliament wants to so earnestly grapple with the housing shortage today, what do you think this report is telling you about the housing shortage? Not in the forever ever. 25 years away is less than the time of most mortgages. So, and by the way, these places are going to become uninsurable and in turn unmortgageable way before then. So, you know, these costs are going to be enormous. They're already with us. We're already ignoring the people in Lismore. We're already ignoring the bushfire victims. We'll be ignoring more people while we're being generous to the fossil fuel industry. But what this report says is it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And any attempts today to approve a bit of land to build some extra houses because supply is important, come off it. This is going to do far more to reduce the supply of housing than every YIMBY group in Australia could hope to achieve.
Just one final question, if I could, Chair. What does it say that we as a country are prepared to commit $376 billion to AUKUS for nuclear submarines that we may never even get, but there's not a single dollar allocated for the new adaptation plan released yesterday, and no plans for extra dollars in at least 18 months for that?
Only a macroeconomist can say this. The cost of the AUKUS submarines is so trivial in the scheme of Australia's economy that it didn't go to Treasury. There was no cabinet submission, and indeed Labor supported it from opposition without seeing any modelling or anything. Now, I'd take the defence experts' view that we probably don't need them, but the reality, that's how rich we are. That when a government said, how about we spend $360 billion on some submarines, Josh Frydenberg was quoted as saying, when he was asked, can we afford it, his answer was, if it's a priority, we can always afford it. Now, I know it seems ridiculous to say that $360 billion isn't a lot of money. It's an enormous amount of money for a person. It's an enormous amount of money for a state budget this year. But we are so rich that when the former government said, let's spend $360 billion, the then Treasurer said, no problem, because it was a priority. Now, I think there's much better things to spend the money on, but Australia, one of the lowest tax countries in the OECD, if we just collected the average amount of tax, we'd collect an extra $140 billion a year. So, in the scheme of things, the fact that we can throw that much money at the submarines, not at defence in total, that's just one project.
Yep.
If we can spend that much money on some submarines just in case, then how can we look ourselves, how can the Parliament look itself in the eye and pretend that we're not willing to spend a similar amount of money to prepare not just for a just in case, but what this report just said is heading our way at record speed. So we can actually afford to do both, is my point. I'd rather focus on the climate and not the subs. But to be clear, if we got rid of those fossil fuel subsidies, if we started taxing our gas exports, we wouldn't even need to get rid of the subs. But I tell you what, if we did both, boy, we'd be living in a wonderful country.
Thank you. Thank you. Michelle.
Thank you, Chair. I often, lament in this place that had we actually passed that carbon pollution reduction scheme all those years ago, we wouldn't be in this situation at all. We would be actually taxing the polluters. But that is in the rearview mirror, and that sort of policy has died because of broken politics in this very place, albeit over a decade ago. So I take your point. With respect to adaptation, we have actually put some money into adaptation. People may not be aware of this. It's about $3.6 billion. And if you factor in all the other indirect programs that touch on climate resilience and adaptation, it goes up to $9 billion. But the report was only released yesterday, and so, of course, there'll be, I'm sure, more discussion to come on that front. But I think it's also interesting that within a few hours of this report being released, that there was commentary by some politicians that we should drop our commitment to net zero. And there is obviously debate by some politicians that net zero is a waste of time, that it's going to bankrupt us. Can you please speak to that and explain to perhaps the people who are watching how important it is that we hold the line on net zero by 2050, given what has landed in the last 24 hours with these reports? Because it is a live debate. Yeah. It's a live debate.
So, of course, the Parliament did pass the carbon pollution reduction scheme. Of course, it was in place for 3 years, and we knew it worked. We saw it work. We saw the economy grow, and we saw emissions fall. So the Parliament did put the carbon price in. It is a pity that a subsequent parliament repealed it, and it's a pity that your government doesn't want to revisit it. But we did have one. It did pass with the Greens' support, and it worked. So
the Gillard government.
Yes, the Gillard government passed the scheme.
And the Abbott government withdrew us.
Absolutely, they did. But my point is, if we took evidence,
we had a decade of climate wars after that. But if you could just talk about the question, the substance of the question, thanks.
Well, the substance was
the live issue is retreating from net zero by 2050 by some politicians in this building.
Yeah, well, I think we have to be very careful with net zero. It's what the science says is that we need to rapidly reduce fossil fuel use, and the "and" does all the work here. Sequester as much carbon as we can in the landscape. And unfortunately in Australia, what's central to the government's climate policy is the idea of offsetting, which is the opposite. What offsetting says is it's okay to expand fossil fuel production if someone plants a tree. It's okay to expand fossil fuel production if someone promises to not chop a tree down. So the net in net zero has to be very carefully scrutinised, because at the moment transport emissions are rising in Australia and emissions from fugitives are rising in Australia. We're seeing fossil fuel emissions rise, and the science says they have to fall. The science says we have to reduce fossil fuel emissions and plant more trees and sequester. So unfortunately the safeguard mechanism and the government's approach to net zero, not the rhetorical concept, but the policy approach of the safeguard mechanism, says that a company like Chevron can actually see its emissions increase while it's meeting its so-called safeguard obligations.
So are you comfortable with politicians in this building walking away from net zero?
Well, it depends what the net comes from. If the net is coming from offsets with no plausible science behind them.
That's not exactly the truth, is there? I mean, renewable energy has increased in this country thanks to our policies. We have an industrial framework around incentivising low-carbon fuels like green hydrogen, for example, green metals, and so on. So, you know, there is an attempt by the government. I mean, you can whack us with a stick all you want, but there is an attempt, absolutely,
you
to transition us. But
you did ask the witness for their response.
Yeah, but the witness is also not giving a fulsome answer.
No, cherry picking.
Well, I'm sorry, but you know.
Okay, you're not in a debate. You're not in a debate with the witness. So
I would like to hear also from Admiral Barry.
Just to round off, the net is only as good as the quality of the policies and the offsets used to do the net. And if you're not interested in the quality of the policies, that's okay. If you're not interested in the quality of the offsets, that's okay. But I'll put in a supplementary submission giving you the data showing that Chevron is not only increasing its emissions, but it's actually generating offset credits it can sell to other polluters while its emissions are rising under the so-called safeguard mechanism. So they're meeting their net zero obligations while their actual emissions are rising. Now, if you're comfortable with that, that's okay, but that's not science. The science says we have to lower the emissions and we need to plant a tree.
Thanks.
Not that you get to choose.
Dr Dennis, I'm interested in the government's response out of yesterday. This report handed down a lot of acknowledgement about how how big the risks are, and I take the point that you've both made that this is best case, minimum cost. And in response to questions such as why the Environment Minister signed off on the Woodside expansion last week before this had happened, the Climate Change Minister and other government representatives have said, well, we need gas for the transition. So that's the justification for why Woodside has been able to expand and been given a licence to do that till 2070, well past 2050. The excuse was, well, we need it. We heard Minister on the radio this morning talking about the need for peaking gas. Can you respond to that? Because it seems to me that if 80% of the gas is being exported, then why do we need to expand what we're already producing?
Well, I would argue we don't. Again, let's start with the science. According to the UNFCCC, according to the UN Secretary-General, according to the International Energy Agency, to have any chance of keeping the world at 1.5 degrees, we need no new gas and coal developments anywhere in the world. To be clear, the Australian government denies this science. Okay? The UN says it, the IEA says it, the Australian government rejects it. And not only rejects it, counters with, no, we need more gas. Right? So let's just own this. The UN Secretary-General, the International Energy Agency say to contain climate change to 1.5 degrees, we need no new gas and coal anywhere in the world. The Australian government response is, you don't understand, we need more gas, not less. So again, we're not transitioning away from it. We're ignoring the climate science here. It's a democracy. We're allowed to do this, but we should own the consequences. When the Australian government says the world needs more of our gas, they're making an assertion, which they've provided no evidence for, that by selling more of the fossil fuels that cause climate change, they're arguing that if we sell enough gas, the world will buy less coal, and switching from gas to coal will lower emissions. But you know what else Australia does? We export coal. And you know why we're opening new coal mines? Because we're saying the world needs more of our coal too. So we're actually justifying gas expansion, which ignores the science, by saying, but the gas will displace the coal. So, well, why are you still approving new coal mines then? Mumble, mumble. Right, so to be clear, it's a democracy. We're allowed to ignore science. We ignore criminologists all the time. We ignore economists all the time. We can ignore climate scientists all the time. We have for decades. But there's no science that says drilling for more fossil fuels will lead to less use of fossil fuels. We're through the looking glass here, but it is science denial to say this. It says the UN Secretary-General is wrong. It says the UNFCCC is wrong. It says the IEA is wrong.
So in order to, for Australia's domestic energy use and to transition as we know we're going to need to do, and this report says this very clearly, what the devastating impacts will be if we don't, does Australia have enough fossil fuels?
Oh, of course we do. So, yes, the vast majority of Australia's gas is exported. It's just kind of... I grew up in the Hunter Valley. It's hard to imagine anyone in the Hunter Valley feeling when the coal price goes up, they'll get rich, right? Like, we just don't think like this. But here we are, a massive exporter of energy. The world price of energy has just gone up a lot. We should be swimming in cash, right? But we're not, because the foreign-owned companies that make all the profit are swimming in cash. So we're exporting all these fossil fuels. We're collecting very little tax from it, giving half of it away for free. Yet we're telling voters, oh, there's a shortage of this stuff. That's why the price is so high. I mean, come off it. Imagine the Saudis trying to convince the Saudi citizens that there's a shortage of oil. It's ridiculous. Or the Qataris. So, no, there's no shortage at all. And to give you a sense of it, because we're such an enormous exporter of gas, to export gas you've got to cool it. These giant refrigerators cool it down and put it on those bubble-shaped ships. We use more gas to compress the LNG than the manufacturing industry uses, right? We use more gas to get the gas on the boats than all of the households in Australia use. Right? So it's just inconceivable that we could have a shortage of gas when not only do we export far more than we use more gas to liquefy it than the household sector uses. So of course there's no shortage. But what drives all of this is some companies spent tens of billions of dollars on giant fridges. All right? And for them to get their money back, that giant fridge has to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the next 30 years. So if for some reason we stop approving new gas wells, then they won't get to run their giant fridge 24/7 for 30 years. And the whole economic case for the $10 billion fridge was it would run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week forever.
And this is at the export terminal.
And that's the export terminals. So the export facilities cost tens of billions. And once you've built them, imagine if you'd built a giant fridge that can put the gas onto the ship, but there wasn't new gas projects getting approved inland. Then, it's like a restaurant that's closed 4 nights a week. So that in order for them to keep profiting from this enormous fridge they built, we have to cause climate change because otherwise they owe tens of billions of dollars on a giant liquefaction plant that's not getting used very often. Just add, in the lead up to the government's productivity roundtable, the Productivity Commission endorsed the idea of better building standards for housing, which I thought was a step in the right... The construction code, which I thought was an unusual step in the right direction from the Productivity Commission. However, then at the roundtable, everybody agreed that we wouldn't make any changes to the code, even though the Productivity Commission's own submission to that process was that we need it. But then today in the paper I read that maybe we will be embracing these regulations that just a month ago we were told weren't going to happen. So
a pause till 2029.
A pause till 2029. So hopefully we can go back to the Productivity Commission's original thing, and unfortunately one of the few things that came out of the Productivity Roundtable was rejecting that. But now we're rejecting the rejection.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to keep up to date with all our latest research and work, sign up to our newsletter. Delivered every fortnight, it includes behind-the-scenes updates from Richard Dennis, an exclusive cartoon from Judy Horacek, details for our upcoming events and webinars, as well as explainers, graphs, and not to mention the latest cutting-edge research and analysis from the team here on the key issues that are facing Australia. Click the button on your screen to check it out.